Hello, my name is Michela O'Connor Abrams, founder of Mocha Plus. Welcome to our Collective Conscience series. We created this series for you to bring together great minds from around the world on myriad topics that we hope will expand your mind, will challenge your current beliefs, and give you an opportunity to be inspired with every video. Enjoy.
Welcome to the 20th Collective Conscience Salon. I'm Shelley Tatum-Kieran, partner at Mocha Plus, and we're so excited to have our guest here this evening. Michela will elaborate. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Michela and Amanda.
Thank you, Shelley. Well, welcome everybody to our 20th Collective Conscience. As you could see from the invitation, we've turned the lens on ourselves. It is no accident that one of, I think, the finest editors and heads of content in the country, Amanda Dameron, was chosen to do this interview because I knew there'd be no softballs. I knew she'd still get to the meat of the content, and she doesn't suffer fools, so she'd make sure that not only your questions got answered, but we brought out all of the salient points in this data. Very simply, for the last 10 years, we have been charting and following the attitudes and behaviors of the most affluent, design-centric consumers in the country. So what I'm going to do is share with you just some of that top line, as each of our guests has done, most of them have done. It gives you a little bit of a visual story before we get into the Q&A so that there's a context to all the questions. So Amanda, I want to thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview. I enjoyed all 9 years that we worked together, and there's a reason why you went from digital intern to like head of content for the world. So thank you very much. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, there it goes. Thank you. That is so nice of you to say. What a brilliant setup for me. You know, it's a pleasure to be here, and I am always excited to talk shop with you as, you know, what we're going to talk about this evening. It informed all of our decisions in all of the years that we worked together, and what I learned from the data itself has informed my decisions that I make to this day. So I'm really eager to get into the conversation with everybody here, and thank you for having me.
Pleasure. All right, without further ado, truth or data, very simply, the reason we chose to do this, as I said, not only was turn the lens of ourselves, but there is not been a time in my lifetime, which is just a few decades, where we have been inundated by data on a daily basis, whether it's COVID, the election, the sentiment of the world about decisions that we make individually and collectively. There is so much coming at us that it's very hard to say to somebody, make your decisions based on the data. Because the reasonable question is, which data are you talking about? Who's the source? What's the base? What matters is the why more than the what. And when we started what was then the Dwell Insights group, the whole purpose was to actually solve for the why, knowing that everybody else in the country was charting the what. There was no shortage of research companies from Nielsen to Mendelsohn to MRI and everybody in between. But few people were talking about what does the data mean? And if you take the data plus your knowledge of that industry and are able then to give it context, it's not about being right, it's about providing a point of view so that the person with the data is still able to make their own decisions and come up with their own conclusions. And that, after all, is what the power of data really means, not just accepting it at face value, but understanding it at a much deeper level and ultimately what that means to you. So very simply, this Design Insights Forum began, interestingly enough, at the beginning of the last recession. And I'd love to tell you that we knew that was going to be the case, but we didn't. We just did it because as a brand, Dwell signified good design in everything we do. And the research studies that were available then we're giving you a way to show an advertiser how you won, why you were number one, why your composition of your audience was even more important than the coverage that somebody larger than your brand had. And so it went for many, many decades. So when we were entered into these studies and informed that we would be measured, I went to Monroe Mendelsohn, who's now Ipsos Mendelsohn, if you look that up. And it is a global research study, the oldest who's tracked the affluent population. And I said, I want to take your agreement statements and actually talk about the why, not the what. You will do the what and we will do the why. And so we launched the Dwell Insights Forum. And we found that people were so hungry for information because we weren't statistically trying to manipulate the data to show why we were number one. We were trying to show people why things mattered, why design mattered that was beyond aesthetic design of architecture and design. So we have carried that forward. I was fortunate enough to be able to help the company that acquired the Dwell Insights Group that then became Freeman Insights Group, and I helped them ingest it, if you will, bring it into their data set. And then when I left so that Shelley and I could build Mocha Plus, they were kind enough to sell it to us. So rare opportunity to have something that you founded with a team of amazing people 10 years ago to now have it back in our hands, all the data. So it is longitudinal and it does track against the US population. It's a panel of 8,000 people that represents 13 million heads of household who plan to spend $300 billion in everything in addition to food and shelter. As you can see, it's more female than it is male, but really statistically not that significant. The median age and income is right where we thought it would be at 45 and almost $250,000. Now that's normalized, as you might imagine, for the United States, because it was just recently that I found out that low income in Marin County is $112,000. So for people who thought the affluent survey was for 100,000 median income, needless to say, it is because it's also true in Keokuk, Iowa, not just in New York and Marin, etc. Sorry, it's not going to the next slide. Sorry, please excuse me. My other guests are far better at going to the next slide than I. All right, so here is a very quick snapshot of all of the industries that this research served and all of the companies for whom we did in-depth research of attitudes and behaviors. So Mercedes for how to sell cars to people under 50, to window and door manufacturers to understand how to be more of a lifestyle brand and not be thought of as a building, to the resort and real estate industry to talk about the story that happens there, not just selling a piece of land. And I could go on, but you see that this took off and did very well and continues to be a great engine for innovation inside brands and companies. We found, and this is just one slide that has been done every single year of this study, that when you ask people, what are the brands or companies that you like the most and that you trust? Apple always won the day. And as you can see, it's also a diverse group of brands. So you'll have Chanel with Ralph Lauren and with Target, Subaru with Audi and BMW, Whole Foods with Miele, Herman Miller with IKEA, and I could go on. We did an entire industry certification unit based just on this slide. And people would often ask, well, is it because you think Apple is just the best brand? And why is that? And the answer was reasonably simple in that it is the brand that cared about every design element, from the packaging to the font to the experience when you walk into the glass box called the Apple Store and meet with a genius. So it's not that it's the best technology or the most beautiful phone or the best experience at retail. It is the inextricable link between all those things that makes them loved by the affluent, design-centric consumer. The trends that we also tracked were things like technology permeating every aspect of life. Now, this chart shows you from 2011 through to the end of 18. So this was taken out of the field in December, and we reported on this in 2019. That everything from political partisanship and polarization, of course, on the rise. And imagine if we'd asked that question today, what that answer would be. I dare say off the index. Awareness of food sourcing, separation of have and have-nots. You can see that as a country, based on this audience as your barometer, that we have not hugely surprising data, but that all of this is what informs their views on everything they buy, that they care about, that they invest in, not only just for their own profit, but in the nonprofits and the charities with whom they're investing. The only two things that were a little bit of a surprise for us that went down was the importance placed on protecting the environment and consumers supporting local businesses and products. And we had lots of qualitative information and quotes from that we can share with you. But the interest of brevity wanted is to give you an idea how we not only look at the trends and track them, but how these trends inform all of the decisions this very powerful consumer group makes. What we have just launched from this is a Take 5 survey. I think we would all agree that the times in which we're living call for snapshots that give us an opportunity to look at where we all are right now, which is dramatically different than where we were 6 months ago. These are snapshots. I want to shout out to Michelle and Beth McGee, both of whom have been on what was Dwell Insights to Freeman and now to Design Insights Forum at Mocha Plus, because they are the engine that makes this work and help bring to us how this data can be looked at and how we contextualize it for you and for brands. So this first Take 5, and we've done only 2 at present, this is a monthly snapshot from the panel focused on the hot topics of the day. What will be the positive outcomes in a post-COVID world? How do we look at innovation and perspectives? And what about investing in your health? What about being cautiously optimistic and why? So there's a great deal of data behind this snapshot, but we want everybody to see just what we're following, what we're asking, and how then we take knowledge of industries with this data and contextualize it, again, not only for our collective conscience community, but for the brands with whom we're working. Another one is and the only other one we've done at this point is focused on the uncertainty and the time to engage and why. What are the concerns about the direction of this country? What about the thoughts of the pace of reopening the country? Again, just a snapshot, knowing that as we start looking at these and other issues in the coming months, all that pie chart will start to reshape. Point being, of course, that as we keep our fingers on the pulse of this very powerful group of people, it not only helps us understand what content to bring to life for our community, but how to help the brands that Mocha Plus serves. And that is the end of formal comments until we go and now going into Q&A. Anything that you would like to know more about that, please don't hesitate to visit mochaplussf.com. I notice this just says Mocha Plus F, but there is another S in there to learn more. And of course, you know how to get a hold of me, most of you do, and Shelley, and we're happy to share more with you. So Amanda, take it away.
Thank you. I was in mute purgatory there. So I was just sitting there like, I'm muted right now. Anyway, That was excellent. I love seeing your presentation. I love seeing, you know, just kind of the collage of imagery that reinforces the decade of work that has gone into this this discipline. And you know, I think my first question has to be, after 10 years of being steeped in this research and refining it and just honing in on it with laser focus, what have you learned? Do you want to share? Do you want to share any? Do you have any top level insights, quick ones that you might like to just? What was the most surprising thing along the way, if you could find one?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think one of the most surprising things was that there had always been, and to some extent still exists, the thought of people, when you say design, they immediately think you mean home design and furniture design and graphic design and print design. And for the purpose of this panel, and is still true ever more actually, this is really about a design intelligence, about the fact that all of our systems, including our bodies and our own cell structures, are designed, right? So I want people to, and one of the things we're working on from a content perspective is to start bringing that out through the different leaders of industries on collective conscience, so that we can help make much more interesting, and perhaps maybe I can even say democratize the word design, so that once and for all it's thought of as just good design in everything we do. And if you think that way, if you allow for design to be your construct, then it's not only freeing, but it gives you a way and a lens through which to look at everything that every aspect of your life. And I think for those of you who have been on for Bruce Mao or Bob Priestek or Eames Demetrius, you see that it wasn't about aesthetic design. It was absolutely about the design of the way the world works. So that has been the thing that I've been most pleased that brands have begun to understand that. And admittedly, part of it was coming from Dwell, which was a modern home and living brand. The thought was, well, she must be doing it to understand more about home. But the truth of the matter was, we were doing it to talk more about why good design matters always. And that, as Bruce Mao says, for better, for worse, everything's connected, therefore everything matters.
Absolutely. And you touched a little bit on the point when you were first really beginning to gather the idea for really harnessing this data and really creating the Dwell Insights group. In the years before, of course, we saw the last major global economic crisis of 2008 and how that affected the business of home, shall we say. Already at that point, you had spearheaded Dwell on Design, the conference, the annual conference that took place in Los Angeles and brought, 30,000 people for a weekend of insight and storytelling around design and all that manifested, and all that manifested within that beyond just home. So I'm interested, you already had these wheels turning, but how did you use these insights you were gleaning? How did you use that and actually position Dwell as an entity, knowing that, economically times were tough, advertising times were tough, and people needed and were searching for ideas and inspirations that leapt from more than just the page?
Yeah, well, good question. I mean, there were a number of things we did as a brand. I mean, not the least of which was humanize design, right? There wasn't the perfect vase. I mean, Dwell was founded on the fruit bowl manifesto, that if you see a perfect bowl of fruit, life's not happening there. There were so many things that actually pulled from that original mission, so that what we really endeavored to do was to build a brand around saying that because everything matters to design, then we will have discussions on every forum possible that engages professionals and people for whom design was their avocation, people who didn't know anything about design but were fascinated by the things that we were showing in live spaces like Dwell on Design and our other content conferences and forums that we would do around the nation. So we really allowed this study to give us inspiration and ideas. We dipped into this all the time to do what was then not formally called Take 5, but we did that internally all the time to guide what should be next. Like, would people buy furniture and design objects from a brand called Dwell if we put it at Target? And the answer was yes. We launched a collection at Target. It was there a little over a year. We learned so many lessons. The Dwell store, we had 7 platforms by the time we were finished, and the real inspiration and intelligence from it, so that we weren't just launching on gut feeling, came from what was then the Dwell Insights group. So the Design Insights Forum has helped inform Dwell and all the companies that we've had the good fortune of working with over the years.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so, and thinking about the many people, 8,000, that comprise this group that you were able to leverage for insights, I've heard you use the phrase buyers and bellwethers. Is that right? Can you talk a little bit about that and a bit of context for why you use that phrase and what that means?
Right. So when we set out to create the panel, we knew that, you know, we had no desire to boil the ocean, right? We weren't trying to measure the masses. We were trying to be very clear that this was a segment of the population that happened to be the most affluent, design centric. So there were filters. It wasn't about just recruiting someone to fill out a survey who then checked the right box about their income. It really was about lots of other things that we used as the indices in order to guide the panel and then the subsequent studies. So knowing that we would mine this data all the time, constantly looking at how we would help brands at the same time, we made sure that we understood all of the buying habits of this group. If you are planning to travel, were you planning to remodel your home? If you had, how much were you planning to spend? Where in the world were you planning to travel? I mean, we took transportation, consumer packaged goods, home building products, and real estate companies, and you name the industry, financial services and healthcare. And we would go into this and find out how much people were really willing to and planning to invest. The interesting thing about having it be longitudinal is we were able to go back and see if they did what they said they would do. And about 80% of the time, they did exactly what they said they would do. So each year, if they said they'd spend $300 billion on everything in addition to food and shelter, it came true. They said they were planning to do the remodel or invest in a second home or lease a new car or change their car to an electric car. These things came to fruition, again, about 80% of the time. So we were able to go to the automotive companies, the airlines, the financial service companies, and show them these attitudes and behaviors and what a picture, right, of their future customer or possibly their current customer planned on doing and planned on spending. And this made a pretty significant impact in many, many brands. I'd love to share some of those, but we did so many proprietary studies that we weren't allowed, of course, to talk about, but that did guide some of the largest brands on that brand cloud you saw earlier.
Exciting. You know, we are buried under data, as you said, and there's a lot of data out there. And sometimes it's hard to know what's authentic, what's relevant. Can you talk a little bit about how you've been able to kind of establish and carve out the relevancy for the data that you are working with?
Yes, well, frankly, it's two things very clearly. One is being laser focused on the segment that we're serving, that we're not trying to be all things to all people. We're not trying to say this is the sentiment of everybody in the United States, and here's a statistically projectable sample of the US population. We're saying this is a segment of the population. They're 45 years old. They make $250,000 as median. They actually are reasonably distributed on the coast and in the middle of the country. And they always are so far prescient, right, in what we find when we even look back, again, why it's been so powerful to have longitudinal data. So I would tell you that to be able to have a study that is that focused makes all the difference in the world, because design is also, and design thinking is now not just this strange notion of the design intelligentsia. It really has come into the more common vernacular. The second reason that it is so powerful is because we started in the last recession, and we have data on the attitudes, behaviors. I mean, it's a tome of information, right, on what they plan to do and buy and why they like the brands that they like and what's important. I think one of the things that has always, I don't know, surprised the brands with whom we've worked, but has been very important to them, is that this group thinks of themselves as every one of those brands that they mentioned as their ambassador. That, like it or not, whether they bought the product or not, or did business with a company or not, they had a very distinct opinion and considered themselves someone who should be referenced when somebody was making a purchase decision from that company. So powerful. And then finally, I said two things, and sorry, I'm on three, Amanda, but it's that we didn't pay these panelists. They filled out a very, very long survey twice a year and came into other surveys on behalf of brands with just being entered into a competition. And I think that they were willing to do that because they consider that they're helping shape not only the future of brands and consumer attitudes, but that if they can help make things better and make marketing messages more current and understand what social media's use really is in consumer behavior, then they're happy to do that. And so we have an amazing participative group that, you know, isn't handed $100 to answer a question.
Right. So if I could shift to more of a tactical question, when we're talking about how you actually go about deriving these insights, can you share some insight into the instruments you're using to derive these ideas?
Well, so we start really with first just looking at the study that we've been doing this whole time, so that in order to keep it longitudinal, many of the questions must stay the same so that we have a reasonable comparison over time and we can look at, and I showed that one chart from 2011 to 2018, so you can see how things move and change. Then as we are deriving the content and understanding how to synthesize the data in order to turn it into stories, of which, of course, you might imagine one piece of data can yield many, many stories because it depends on what it is you're focusing on, right? So we use industry knowledge. We use other industry experts. Beth McGee and Michelle Jarris have been doing this a long, long time, and they are legitimately the pros at this, understanding where are the things we should look for, how to see a significant trend in a piece of data that we may just have gleaned and not be part of the current longitudinal, but for a brand, and what that might mean to the brand, and then ways in which the brand looks at it. And then finally, if we're using the study with a brand, we make sure that we're collaborating on all of their data. How they're doing, what makes them tick, what are they finding with their own customers, so that we're able to glean a lot from what they are already doing, and then look at our sample and then come up with ways in which our data from the insights can help those companies.
Mm-hmm. Earlier you mentioned kind of the wide breadth of different categories of, you know, partners who are interested in this data, and, you know, it ranges from financial services to automotive to, of course, you know, building and materials. Can you talk a little bit, I mean, along the way, what was surprising to you? Were you ever surprised? I mean, or did you have it all baked from the beginning and you knew that everybody was going to come running?
I did. I had the crystal ball. I knew exactly what was going to happen. I knew exactly when the economy was going to recover. I invested okay, I guess I'll stop that line of, yes. So here's what surprised me. Coming out of this launch and actually debuting this in New York in a great theater inside 30 Thompson, we had people saying, wow, we haven't seen this before. We haven't seen somebody take this segment of the population. And so where do we sign up? And I thought that the people would be the building products manufacturers with whom we already had very deep relationships. And to my surprise, the largest category was automotive. And here we were, a brand that really didn't write about cars. When we covered them, it's because we were doing, they weren't really advertorials, but they were editorial stories, whether it was launching Saturn, which I remember with GM, or Porsche's Cayenne, and then the Macan, or Lexus and the hybrid, and I could go on. We at one point were working with 14 different automotive brands. And that was a huge surprise because I really felt it was going to be something closer to what the Dwell brand already signified. But the truth of the matter was the automotive companies knew that to tap into design-minded people was what they needed. And those were going to be their early adopters. And in fact, that is what ended up happening. So we helped launch the BMW E series in Miami, which you probably remember, and many, many, many others. So that was the biggest surprise. And the work was a great deal of fun. I mean, we had a lot of clients who were in what I'll call our endemic base, but the automotive category was a blast.
You know, that's interesting, the way that that insight opened the door to editorial exploration, certainly more so of the future of transportation and future thinking and talking to designers about their ideas and working together to create you know, these stories that really were about possibility. And
Right.
so, you know, that's just one way in which, you know, this data or these insights kind of guided what we as Dwell had permission to talk about. You know, I'm sure there are many others, many other instances that you could point to that were the result of the data and the insights. Do you have any off the top of your head?
I think the other was being invited to speak at the CIO forum in Boulder. And I thought, okay, and obviously coming out of technology media, that wasn't that big of a stretch to me, but I thought, what about this data do CIOs need to run the companies in this country? And what they were interested in is, what did we think that this group was going to think about and do about being a leader in technology in their industries in 5 years and in 10 years. So we used the data to do that forecasting. We did another sample that was projectable. And then I had the good fortune of staying in touch with two of these gentlemen who got back to me years later and said, you were right, it worked. I'm like, well, I'd like to say that I was right, that that it was just, I was a psychic about this, but it was this panel. It really was deriving the data from these insights and the data that we put in the field that led them to understand there were things like, were people going to be more resistant to democratizing their personal information? How much was privacy going to be a chief concern of their generation, of the next generation? And they said, it's not going to be as big a deal, and companies will take advantage of that. And where are we? And I could go on and on. So that was probably one of the most surprising keynotes that I was asked to do using the panel. But again, I mean, it pretty much could go against any industry. I mean, when you look at the sentiment on whatever news source you use, and you look at our Take 5 on the post-COVID world and the optimism, it's it's encouraging, actually. It's pretty encouraging. Every time I start feeling a little like, oh God, when is this going to end? I go back to this data that just came out of the field 3 weeks ago and look at that. And the number of positives about our consciousness, about the ways in which we will think about our place in the world and our personal responsibility and how divided we are, but where do we find our points of common interest? All those things you can pick up on any news story, right?
And that's important and impactful work. So how do you recruit people for this panel? Can anybody who likes to join it? How does that part work?
Yeah, so Michelle, if she hasn't raised her hand by this point, going, please make this a topic. Recruiting for the panel is not an easy thing. Like I said, if we were studying the mass population, I'd say, come one, come all, please fill out the survey. We'll let you enter a drawing for winning of an iPhone. But the fact of the matter is we do want people to apply to be in it, but there is a screener for the panelists, and they must agree to these agreement statements about their thoughts about design, how much they think about design affects everything in their life. Their income is an issue. Those are the only things that we do not filter. We ask demographic and geographic questions, but we do not filter anybody out by those. It's really the design agreement statements, the affluent statements that, as I said at the beginning, came from Ipsos Mendelssohn, and that's it. So recruiting is an ongoing effort. We must continue to do it all the time. We are managed so that you don't think that we're doing this in my wine cellar downstairs. All of our data and panel management is done at Qualtrics, and Freeman, because they're so huge and manage so much data, keeps that for us.
Got it. Thanks for the look under the hood on that one. I do want to reserve some time for questions from everyone, but before we do move to that, you touched on this a little bit before, but I'd love to talk a little bit more. One last question. You've mentioned that this panel is comprised of people that are design centric. They care about design in all facets of their life. They are attuned to it. They are adept at thinking about, design thinking and what that means and that kind of critical theory that goes with that. Do you, as a result of that, do you feel like this is that makes for a more powerful panel across the board simply because you are tapping into this mode of thinking?
I do, and I am particularly sensitive, and certainly was when I ran Dwell, to anybody saying the best, the only, not just because it sounds so self-serving, but because rarely is it true. It's just usually been a marketing statement. What's true is the way in which we have decided to do this research, using panel-based research, recruiting and then filtering, looking at just the affluent and understanding what that is across the United States against a census, not just from a certain state or geography. I do believe that the insights from this continue to be unique. Let me say that. And I think that there isn't another company that does what we do the way that we do it, which really, therefore, the power of it means that when we work with a brand, whether it's a startup who's trying to figure out where they fit and where will people resonate with their product or their voice or both, it is, I think, the most powerful lens that one could use. If somebody is looking for an addressable market and trying to understand, is this market big enough for my product? And it's not just purely in design, then I'd say they would need this and Mendelssohn or MRI or Nielsen. So it really is unique in that we do that, plus the insights that we take great pride in creating this content and helping not only share the voice that Mocha Plus has derived from this, but with other brands, I think makes it really pretty special and continuing to be unique.
Yeah. I mean, the analysis of data is storytelling, as you said. You can derive stories from what the data tells you and how that relates to content and the experience you can provide for people. It can't be, it can't be discounted. And certainly, you know, from my perspective, the insights that came, you know, twice a year or as the analysis developed, it guided so many decisions related to discussion topics, you know, in forums such as these, or, you know, special issues devoted to a certain topic that went beyond what was in the general kind of wheelhouse.
Right.
And it was, again, using that data to make informed choices with courage and conviction. And the result was a positive one and continues to pay dividends. So
well, I'm going to remind you, Amanda, of one that we sourced because you and I both wanted to do, you know, the top women in design. And we wanted to just test the topic and make sure that we could do a cover on it. And just really, because of course, architecture is still mostly dominated by men. And we went in and it didn't test well, but we'd want to do it anyway because I said, well, damn it, we're 75% of this company is women and we have to champion it and go against and it sold miserably and our newsstand numbers were pretty abysmal, which doesn't make me regret doing it, by the way. But it once again just showed that panel really showed us what was going to work and what didn't.
I think about it all the time. That happened in 2000.
What would happen if we did that today? Not in a magazine, of course, but in a different format.
You know, and as time has marched on, just from my own perspective, data has allowed me to make gut check decisions, in the sense that, of course, it's informed by data because I've learned how to analyze it, as opposed to just throwing spaghetti at the wall. And that's mattered. And certainly, yes, I remember that lesson well.
Excellent.
Well, with that, I'd love to open it up to the group if you have any questions.
I actually have a question before we jump into the chat. I wanted to go back to something we've talked about before, Michela, and that is when you were talking about the makeup of the panel, the panel is now stuck with you and is now with us and is associated with Mocha Plus as opposed to with Dwell. And they're it's a loyal group, and their answers are really thoughtful. And you know, we've been finding ways to engage with them, more interesting ways to engage with them, and bring them more into the fold of Mocha Plus. And I'm just curious about what do you think compels a person to be a panelist? What do you think is what's the inspiration for them?
Well, because we have been, you know, again, when you're filtering for design thinking, right, and design intelligence and understanding, and you're explaining that you're using this to help shape the way industries think about their connection to others, their customers, their internal staff, the way in which they work, people want to be a part of change very, very willingly. And different, again, than surveys that come to you about, you know, do you like this? Do you like the color of that? How many times you've been to that store? Which are all valid, you know, for some other purpose. But for ours, I think that every survey, and you've seen many of them, Shelley, they are digging much deeper, right, into the sentiment and the attitudes and the behaviors. And people want to share that. If they think they can make a difference in the way people think, or a brand expresses itself, or an organization takes shape and continues to communicate with its base, absolutely, and ever more so. I mean, the whole get out to vote is a similar thing. It's like, no, this is way, way too important right now. And that's the way this panel has felt all the way along as it regards influencing those decisions.
We have a question from Catherine. Is this going to be continued yearly on the same scope and done 2 times yearly? I assume so, wanted to clarify. And based on the recent COVID inclusion as a question, it seems you are addressing timely topical issues in every survey. Thank you for always fielding my questions. Y'all get my brain on fire. I think she's talking about our survey as opposed to the...
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Yes, we continue to do the survey. Again, one of the most important things to me is this remain longitudinal, so that the one chart you saw briefly, and I'm happy to send that to you, tracks all those behaviors about the environment, about the state of our nation, all those things from 2011 to today. Those become good backdrops to then take that and dig even deeper. So we will continue to do that. And what you see on the Take 5 is because you know, we're not in a meeting that somebody doesn't say, well, let's make a decision that just goes through September, because we don't know where the hell we're going to be in October. And that's not usual. I mean, gone are the days of people really doing big 3- and 5-year plans, but it wasn't that long ago that somebody would still set in motion a strategy for their year, their fiscal year. And right now, people are taking a month at a time, a quarter at a time at the most. So we decided that the Take 5 was really important, and we're pulling that out of the field once a month. And so you'll see another one in a couple months on the post-COVID world.
From Zahid, geographically, how widespread is the panel?
It is only the US. It is not global. It is roughly 42% West, 41% East, and the rest down the middle. Anybody else? Any other questions?
Not in the, hold on. No.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I thank you everybody so much for being a part of this. We will continue, the surveys will continue to bring you wonderful speakers. Myself is outside that group of the 20 weeks. I love being the host. Shelley and I put this together, as you all know, before COVID. We did the first one live here in the room in which I'm sitting now, and then went to weekly. Next week, on Monday, we go back to the farm with Liz Hudson and Hudson Farms, and I'm going to report from the farm with Liz, only in the field if it's not 104. And then we also, at the end of the month, have President Jeffrey Armstrong, who is the president of Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and also on the board of our CSUs. And we'll see Eames Demetrius again at the end of the month. Also our chef Rochelle again for Labor Day grilling and other things. And we will work with Liz and Rochelle at what's coming out of the field. So please do stay with us. We absolutely love doing this every week. And we're also open to new ideas and new speakers. With any luck at all, we'll have somebody who is on this Zoom talk to us about the brain. And she is an amazing neurologist in this country. And so I haven't convinced her quite yet, but possibly because I think that on a number of levels, from our mental health, so the behavioral sciences, to understanding the brain, to the different things that are happening now to our brains, we're getting a lot of feedback, Shelley and I both do, about that topic. So hopefully we will have an amazing professional, an award-winning professional with us in September. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy your week. Appreciate it. And you're always welcome to email us with any questions, suggestions, concerns, anything you have. Thanks so much.
And
Good.
make sure you, if anybody can come next week, make sure you don't miss it, because those two on tractors in the field are going to be, it's going to be an unforgettable session.
Not saying.
Can't miss it.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.